If the hype for the Mad Titan Shadow was big, I think it was probably even bigger than this, because when it comes to Marvel, it just doesn't get any bigger than Spider-Man. Even though this isn't your Peter Parker Spider-Man, Miles Morales is an incredibly popular character in his own right, as is Gwen Stacy Ghost Spider. And just the opportunity to get a lot more Spider-Man themed villains into the game had a lot of people just frothing at the mouth to get this box as fast as they could. And I'll tell you now, just like Mad Titan Shadow, I'm pretty much not going to have anything but good to say about this box. 2 heroes, 5 villains, standard campaign box. We'll go through the heroes first. So we have Gwen Stacy Ghost Spider, and when she came out, I think she was quickly some people's favorite hero. She can be so much fun to play. Her ability allows her to ready whenever she plays a hero response or interrupt on events, and so it is very easy to get multiple uses out of her. And with her 3 defense, she can often defend without taking damage, so she is a lot of fun to play in protection, which is the aspect she came in. And she has really powerful events that just happen to be responses that trigger her ability that play really well. They require you to use a basic power to use them, so you have to attack, thwart, or defend. But then you can play this, and they do a lot. Like the Ghost Kick here for 2 does 6 damage. So you basically can attack with Ghost Spider for 2, pay 2 to do Ghost Kick for 6 more damage, and then that readies Ghost Spider so you can attack for 2 more. So this card basically results in 10 damage all on its own. Phantom Flip removes 5 threat from a scheme for 2, and that's good because she only thwarts for 1. She has a really fascinating setup here with George Stacy, her dad, that when he comes into play, he can hold on to cards for you from your hand, so it makes it easy to set up these combos. She has 2 copies of Web Bracelet that lets her draw cards when she uses her special ability. And the Ticket to the Multiverse basically is either a 2 wild resource card, or you can play it as a 3-cost upgrade that when you trigger it, you reset everything in the game, your hero, your hand, every card in play that says Ghost Spider, and then you basically get to start your turn over, and that can be incredibly powerful. Now, she's strong enough that you usually don't end up needing it because you're probably in control of the game as it is, but she can be so much fun to play. Now, I do have some minor criticisms. I find that she has maybe too many cards that are meant to be played in the villain phase. She has Pirouette and Punch, 2 copies, and Web Binding, 2 copies, and those both respond to things that the villain is doing. And since she plays best in protection, I think you're already going to have a lot of cards that play, in the villain phase. So I do find that sometimes my hands tend to be a little clogged with cards to play because so many of them want to be played in the villain phase. That's a minor quibble, and George Stacy is there to help alleviate some of that. Now, her obligation removes George Stacy from play, so if you get unlucky and have that come out at the wrong time, that can interfere with your plans. But again, these are not that big of a deal. She is a lot of fun to play. Big ups to Gwen Stacy. And she came with protection, like I said, and some really, really good protection allies. Silk here, when she comes into play, she lets you go into your deck and remove an encounter card or a treachery, so you can go get rid of shadows or under fire if you're playing expert, or just whatever you find the most annoying. And the thing we're going to see here is there's a ton of Web Warrior synergy. So they introduced a new tribe into the game, a new trait with these Web Warriors that are all these multiversal spider heroes that have come together. And they all pretty much play very much together, similar to how Avengers, you have to be Avengers to play, Guardians, things like that. A lot of the spider cards are meant to be played together with the Web Warriors, and they're very, very powerful, but they are locked to certain heroes. The Miles Morales hero can come in and stun and confuse an enemy if you have at least 3 Web Warrior cards. Spider UK can deal a ton of damage when he blocks based on your Spider hero cards. Jump Flip was a very good defense event that removes threat, always welcome in protection. Return the Favor is a very interesting card that I've never had the guts to play. That's a 0-cost event that you discard cards until a treachery is revealed during your turn. You reveal it and deal whatever it does, and then you get to do 5 damage to the villain, which is a pretty big chunk for 0. So in the right deck, I think you could really rush down a villain with these, but if you flip the wrong encounter card, that might not end well for you. What Doesn't Kill Me is one of my absolute favorite new protection cards that lets you heal 2 damage from your hero and ready your hero. Now, it's somewhat challenging to play at times because they introduce this requirement that you have to pay at least 1 fist when you play this card. So it's not always that easy to play, but if you have a power of protection or at least 1 fist resource in your hand you're willing to spend, you get a lot of value out of this. I love this in Drax to be able to heal him and ready him to attack again. Oh, such a good card, but it works really well for Gwen as well. The Spider-Man Hobie Brown ally can do a ton of damage when he leaves play. And this Across the Spider-Verse is such a cool card. You pay 2, and you exhaust a Web Warrior card you control, so your hero or one of your allies maybe, or support. You get to search your discard pile only for Web Warrior ally and put it straight into play. And then you can choose a player, and it could be yourself, and you get to do it again if you pay 3 resources. So if you have enough money, you could just go find all your spider heroes, and that card is really, really cool. She has a team up card with Miles Morales. That's this one's just okay. It heals some damage. It's a little bit less exciting, but it's always nice to see the team up cards. And this Web of Life and Destiny is huge, huge for the Web Warriors. It says 3, but it actually only costs 0 if you happen to have the Web Warrior trait. And it just says, after Web Warrior ally leaves play, choose a player. That player draws a card. You don't have to exhaust it, and you can let anybody draw the card after the Web Warrior ally leaves play. So there's no limit, and it's really nice. You can give cards across the table, or even if you're playing in solo, just getting a card back every time a Web Warrior ally leaves is really nice. And some of them have really strong when they leave play effects, so you kind of want them to leave play anyway. Now, this is a really, really interesting design, because why does it have a cost of 3 if you ignore the card's cost if it has a Web Warrior trait? Well, this is one of the only cards in the game. It might be the only one, if I'm not mistaken, but it's one of the few that has the Web Warrior trait, but doesn't require you to be a Web Warrior to play it. So if you really wanted to play a Black Widow Web Warrior deck, you could put this in there. You could pay 3 to get it out, and then now you control a Web Warrior card, so you could play all the other Web Warrior trait-locked cards if you wanted to. Now, I don't know how many people are going to do that, but it's really nice that they gave you the option that it's not completely required for you to be playing a Web Warrior hero. If you want to be using these Web Warrior cards, you do have the option of putting this into play. Now, it's a unique card, so that's a really risky deck type. But again, for fun, if you wanted to, you can do it, and it's neat that the way they design. I think the design of this is just unbelievably smart. And then she came with these Plan B upgrades that allows you to discard a card to deal 2 damage. That could be useful. Her obligation is incredibly annoying. And that's that. Yeah, Gwen's really good. And as good as Gwen is, I think Miles is even better. Miles Morales jumped straight to the top, near the top of my hero rankings list after I played him. He just does so many things that I enjoy. He is very, very strong. Some people would probably rightly say he's too strong. His events are incredibly cheap for what they do. And he has this ability that certain cards will trigger his Venom Blast that deals 2 damage to an enemy and stuns them. And certain cards will trigger his Spider Camouflage that gives him a tough status card and confuses an enemy. And that's where the economy comes in, where the events are already pretty good, and then they trigger these powers. So he has probably the easiest access to stun and confuse in the whole game. Now, this is in the era where they've started to add a lot more steady and a lot more stalwart to villains, so it might not seem as powerful. But if you go back and play older villains who did before they had steady and stalwart, he just dominates everybody because he just always has them stunned and confused. It never seems to stop, and it's a blast. And he also has his alter ego ability that when he changes, you get to shuffle one of his cards back into the deck. I'm always a fan of seeing that kind of ability. It's nice to get your hero cards back. He has this Arachnobatics card. I'm sorry, I'll probably talk about every single Miles Morales card because I'm such a big fan. But this card deals 2 damage to an enemy, and then if they're stunned, it deals 3 more, and if they're confused, it deals 3 more. So this card can do 8 damage to an enemy for 1. Now, most of the time it's not. It's kind of hard to stun and confuse the same enemy, even for Miles at times. But you're probably going to get at least 5 damage out of it most of the time, and that's, for 1, that's already good. Double Life, I made a short about this. I don't make a lot of shorts, but I thought this card was so cool I made a short about it because it allows you to change your form, and there's not a lot of cards that let you go back to alter ego and then flip back to your hero form. So this lets you pop down to alter ego for a minute and ready if you paid for it using a punch resource. And that's really good because he has some really good alter ego supports. And then there's other ones, of course, you can play to take advantage of that too. But so the ability to flip down, he gets to shuffle a card back in alter ego. It's already his ability. And then we'll see some supports here in a minute that he can take advantage of and then pop right back into hero form while he's ready is incredibly strong. So here's one of the events that triggers his abilities. This one removes 4 threat, but also triggers his Spider Camouflage. So for 2, as long as you paid for it with a mental resource, and you'll see in a minute that's not very hard for him, you get to remove 4 threat and confuse the villain and get a tough status for 2. It's nuts. Web Shot is very similar for 4 damage for 2 resources, and you also get to deal 2 more damage and stun. So 6 damage and a stun for 2. As long as you hit this lightning resource requirement, which is not difficult. He has his best friend Genki Lee and his dad Jefferson Davis that are in his alter ego supports. Actually, you can use Genki Lee in either hero or alter ego, but it's a little bit better in alter ego. So those are really useful to have in play. He has cards that can just trigger on demand, pretty much his Spider Camouflage and Venom Blast. And then his web shooters provide him with wild resources, making it very easy to trigger the kickers on those cards. There's just nothing about Miles that isn't awesome. Every single one of his cards is worth playing. They're all super strong. And I should have mentioned, go back to the top here real quick. Whoop, too far. He is both a champion and a web warrior. Now, we're going to talk about the champions here in a minute, but the fact that he has both of those traits is just one more thing that makes him super strong because they both have excellent support. So there are a lot of different ways to build a Miles Morales deck, and he just gets to play the best of both worlds. And if the hero wasn't strong enough, he also came with pretty much an entire deck type that you can slap into any deck that focuses on shield. And this has also become incredibly popular with these shield justice cards. You just keep them all together as a little pack and put them in any hero, and it's going to be a good deck. These shield cards play very well with each other. You get allies like Monica Chang that searches up a surveillance team from your deck and puts extra counters on it. That's an old core set card that I don't think I ever even played, and now here she comes along 2 years later and makes that card awesome. You get Homeland Intervention that can remove up to 6 threat for 0 cost. Now you have to exhaust shield cards, but as you'll see, you're going to have a lot of shield cards in play to exhaust, so that's not a problem. Global Logistics lets you look at the top 4 cards of either the player deck or the encounter deck and fool around with those and set them up to your best advantage. Very, very strong. And one of the things that really makes this whole thing go are these field agents. They're supports that come in with 3 counters. And when your shield allies would take consequential damage, you can simply exhaust these to prevent the damage. And there's some really powerful shield allies that you can use these to keep in play. And when you're not using these to keep shield allies in play, you can use them to be exhausting for Homeland Intervention and Global Logistics. So they're just very, very useful to get those out on the board. So now let's look at some of the best allies in the whole game that all came with the same hero. So we have Agent 13 here, costs 4, Sharon Carter, and she's shield. And after she attacks or thwarts, you get to choose a shield support and ready it. So that's your helicarrier, that's your Sky Destroyer that we're going to see in a little bit. There's other shield supports in play. If you're playing Captain Marvel, you can ready her Alpha Flight Station, which is incredibly powerful. So you can do a lot of really silly things. 4 seems expensive, but she is worth her weight in gold. And she can thwart for 2 for you. So in being basic, just really good in any deck. Dum Dum Dugan could not be happier that he's in the game, one, because I love the character, but this card is just insane. Now, everything you're looking at before you read the text probably makes you think no. He costs 5. He has 3 thwart and 3 consequential on that, 3 attack and 2 consequential. So obviously he's taking a lot of damage. He's got 5 hit points. But remember, we have those shield guys, these, what are they called? Field agents that can eat some of that consequential damage for him. And when you use one of his basic powers, you can exhaust up to 3 shield cards to give that +1. So you could do potentially 6 thwart or 6 attack. And you're probably reducing his consequential damage. So even though he costs 5, by the time you get him out, the game is pretty much going to be over because he is going to take it over and he's going to win it for you in about 2 turns. He is incredibly strong and it's so much fun. And I love everything about this. The way that he's parachuting in just makes me think that's exactly what happens. He just gets dropped into the game and then takes it over. He's awesome. Ghost Spider is a really good basic ally for web warriors that when she leaves play, you can search your deck for an identity-specific event, so one of the best ones in your deck, and put that into your hand so you get a lot of good use out of her. And this here, Peter Parker Spider-Man ally, is absolutely incredible. Now, he is hard to play, potentially. He has this requirement where you have to pay 1 of each resource to get him into play if you're playing him normally from your hand. And he has 2 thwart and 2 attack with 3 health, and after he attacks or thwarts, you choose another web warrior character and ready that character. So you attack with Miles, then you attack with Spider-Man, which will ready Miles, and you attack with him again, or thwart, whatever have you want to do. And it's very, very strong. He gets a lot of work done. Now, that requirement could be difficult, but if you're playing in leadership, Make the Call brings him out, and you can ignore that requirement. If you have that across the Spider-Verse, that will bring him out. So there are ways around that requirement. So if you don't have a way to cheat him in, it can be difficult at times to play him. So that requirement does help balance his strength. But being able to ready your web warriors back up, and, you know, if you've boosted their stats or if you have ways to ready Spider-Man, here you can get a lot of work done. I love this card so much. And I'm always happy when these iconic characters become allies that can go in any deck. These government liaisons help pay for shield cards, reducing their cost. Sky Destroyer does 2 damage every time a shield card enters play. Like the whole thing just flows, just works together so well. And like I said, you just keep all those cards together, slap them in any deck, and it's going to make the deck good. So everything about Miles Morales is just stellar. I'm a huge fan. He's so much fun. Probably a little too strong against villains that aren't stalwart or steady, but if they are, then that definitely brings his power level down, balances him out a little bit. So the heroes in the box are awesome, and the villains are just as awesome. This was another excellent campaign box and another suite of 5 very, very fun villains. Starting off with Sandman here, and I made the comment earlier that the first villain in each campaign has always been good, and that trend has absolutely continued. Sandman is an awesome villain. He's very fun to play against. He has this really neat mechanism where he puts these counters on the city street environment, and depending on the number of counters, every time it gets triggered, it discards cards from the top of his encounter deck, and he's trying to run through his encounter deck as fast as he can, because every time he puts acceleration tokens on his main scheme, it deals 3 indirect damage to the first player, and his attacks are all indirect damage in first and second stage, and then third stage, if you play expert, they're an overkill, so it's really, really hard to avoid his damage. You're always spreading it around everywhere, and so that causes like some interesting things to happen. Now you can remove the counters from the city streets by exhausting a character and taking counters off equal to their attack, and you definitely want to be doing that. You have to manage those counters, because if that starts getting high, some other cards trigger off of how many counters are on there, and it can be really nasty. But if you can manage the counters, he's not too difficult, but he is a lot of fun to play against. Just feels very unique and different. It's got some really interesting cards in here, like these sand clones have an attack equal to the number of sand counters, so that can be very weak or very terrifying. The dirt traps, a lot of things just trigger the surging sands on the city street, so those just more and more cards are constantly being flipped off the encounter deck, which is just completely different from the way every other villain plays. And yeah, I guess there's not a lot more to say other than he's just really fun and plays really well. And as a big Spider-Man fan, as a lot of people are, I know it was just so fun to start playing against these classic Spider-Man villains. These classic Marvel villains have been around forever, and we've known them our whole lives, and it's awesome that they're finally in the game. And Sandman was a great start. And Venom is equally as good. This scenario is very different and just neat. It's just cool. I wish I had more adjectives to use. I feel like I use the same words all the time, but it's just also good. Now, Venom's whole thing is he has this bell tower, and you can put counters on it to flip it over to prevent damage, because he is going to hit you very, very hard. Every time you attack Venom, you have to give yourself a boost card that you're going to later add to Venom when he attacks you. So when he attacks, you're typically going to be getting 2, 3, 4 boost cards, depending on how you handled him. And so you want to be using this bell tower to prevent some of that damage. So you have to make a lot of choices about how you approach Venom when you're going to attack him, if you're going to put the counters in the bell tower or deal damage to Venom. Very, very interesting, very tricky. I think I played him wrong at least the first 2 times I played him. There's a lot going on. I would highly recommend reading the cards closely for this one, because he's a little bit more complicated. Not terribly so. Once you understand how everything works, it's not bad at all. But at least for me, I misplayed how the bell tower worked a couple times, but it's not too bad. He has a lot of really interesting side schemes that trigger when he takes damage, as well as when you remove the threat from them. You can never quite hide from his attacks, because he has things like Now We're Angry that give him overkill. And since he's going to be having so many boost cards when he attacks you, there's a good chance cards like that are going to come out. He just feels very different and unique, and he's fun to play. He's pretty challenging. He's definitely harder than Sandman. And if you're not careful, he can run you over. There definitely requires a certain strategy to approach him, which is fun. He is pretty vulnerable to any kind of direct damage. So like the stuff that protection can do with Flow Like Water and the extra damage from Retaliate and stuff like that, those things don't give him extra boost cards. So if you have ways to damage him outside of just regular attacks, then you can kind of cheese him a little bit. And so he's vulnerable in that way, but still a great scenario design. And I mean, it's Venom. We finally got to fight Venom. And I know that's a really popular character. It's a favorite of many people. So it was nice to see him. We had the Venom hero in the game earlier in the Guardian cycle, but of course that was a Flash Thompson version. This is the classic Eddie Brock version of Venom. And so very, very welcome to see a classic storyline here with the bell tower. Just represents so much of what Spider-Man's about. This was a really good one and a welcome one. Then we get to Mysterio, who's probably one of the easier villains in the box. I would say the overall difficulty of this box in general is lower than what we've seen before. Most of these villains aren't nearly as challenging. They sort of seem to have settled into a design space that I'm a very, very big on. I'm very positive about it, that they make the villains, their default modes, a little bit easier, and then it's up to the players to increase the difficulty with modular encounter sets or by playing on expert or standard 2, things like that. And I think that's the way to go. It's hard to make a scenario easier if it's too hard, but it's really easy to make a scenario harder if it's too easy. So I'm not saying these are too easy, but they are on the easier side compared to Galaxy's Most Wanted and Mad Titan Shadow. But if you want to make it harder, there are many ways to do that. So, but Mysterio is pretty easy, I've found. But he has such a cool mechanism where he shuffles cards into your deck, and then when you draw them, they end up getting dealt to you as encounter cards. And he can really, really mess with you in a lot of fun ways. Now, if those cards don't come out, or you just happen to not get the cards that do that to you, then that's what makes him kind of easier. Sometimes that doesn't trigger. The faster you kill Mysterio, and he doesn't have that much health, the better. If you let him hang around for a long time and he really gets to shuffle a lot of cards into your deck, you probably are going to be in trouble. You're going to have a turn where you have 6 or 7 encounter cards to reveal. It's going to be hard to come back from that. But if you can manage it and you can beat him quickly, he's really not very hard. But he can be just a lot of fun. It's such a neat idea for a villain. And, it feels like Mysterio. They've just done a great job of bringing the theme out. I don't really have much more to say about this, but even though he's an easier villain, I still find him to be a lot of fun to play. And that brings us to the Sinister Six, the 4th scenario in the box, and I think our 3rd multi-villain scenario in this game now. And this is my favorite one of the 3. This takes all 6 Sinister Six members and throws them at you. They come out in sort of a random order. You're never quite sure who you're going to be facing, and they are all really neat. They're really more like big minions in a way, because you have to knock them out to get certain really good benefits. And this one's all about removing threat from this giant side scheme light at the end. It comes with a ton of threat, 10 plus 10 more per player, so 20 in solo. And you have to remove all the threat and flip it over, and then you have to remove a big chunk of threat again. And by defeating the members of the Sinister Six, whenever you defeat them, you remove 4 threat or 7 if they were the last villain in play. And so even if you're not a good thwarter, I thought this was really, really smart. Even if you're playing a hero that's not good at thwarting, you can still hope to win this scenario, because it's all about removing threat, but you can just attack the villains and remove threat that way. So that's really smart design there. Now this one, again, is a little bit on the easier side. We played a 4-player game in Expert, and it was still really not that tough, but it was fun, and it doesn't have to be hard to be fun, at least not for me. I really, really like this scenario. It's just there's a lot of moving parts, seeing the villains jump in and out of play. And I'm not saying it's always easy. They definitely have cards that can get you if they come out at the wrong time and bring a bunch of them out at once. And the way they kind of work is the more of them that are in play at the same time, typically their cards are more powerful. So if you don't do a good job of managing them, if you don't knock them out as fast as you can, and you let 3 or 4 or 5 of them get into play, then they can really get ahead of you. And just what a great way to get a bunch of classic Spider-Man villains into the game. Kraven the Hunter is probably the biggest villain that's been missing from all the movies. We haven't seen him in anything, and he's such a classic big Spider-Man villain, so it was so nice to see him here. Just a really fun scenario, even if it's a little bit on the easier side. Now all that easy talk goes out the window when we start talking about Venom Goblin. This guy quickly shoots up to near the top of the hardest villains in the game. So at least the boss of the box is quite a challenge. Again, he's not Ronin level, but I'd say he's up there around Thanos and Loki. He's pretty tough. Like, you're not going to beat Venom Goblin every time you play him. He has this gimmick where he has 3 main schemes in play, and they're all collecting threat. And every time you put threat on one, you have to trigger the special ability that does something annoying. And as they get completed, you don't lose the game necessarily, but they get flipped over. And then if you lose 2 of them, you do lose the game. So there's a lot of threat to be managed, and these special abilities that get triggered really slow you down. And he has this glider counter that's moving from one to the other. So this one also has a lot of moving parts, no pun intended, that you really have to keep track of. It's easy to play this one wrong too. I will say this box was easier in that the villains weren't that hard, but in some ways it's harder in that the scenarios can be pretty fiddly at times. Not overly so, and I'm really not wanting to hit that note too hard, but they are a little fiddly. You do have to pay a little bit closer attention, and I think that's always going to happen as a game like this goes on. For the scenarios to advance and design, they probably do need to get a little more complicated, but I think they're managing it well. But just be aware There's definitely things to pay attention to that's easy to make mistakes, but there's a lot about this scenario that makes him difficult. He has this We Are One card that gives him +3/+3, and it's somewhat difficult to get rid of. He has some pretty nasty minions in here. And we haven't talked about the modular encounter sets yet, but when we get to the Goblin Glider, the modular set that has that in it, you'll see the thing that really, really makes him hard. Now, it's modular, so you don't have to put it in here, but if you're playing him as his normal setup and he has that Goblin Glider card, that makes him really, really scary and hard to defeat. So this was a worthy boss. I do think he's fun. He's, like I said, he's right up there with some of the hardest villains, but not in an annoying way. He's fun to play. It's just a challenge. You're going to need to bring a strong deck. But, you know, it's good to have that. You feel like you accomplished something when you defeated him. But that might not happen every time you play him. Now, let's look at the modular encounter sets here. There are some really interesting ones here. We have City and Chaos that turns Rhino into a boss-type minion that you can put in your deck, and he has a card that summons him, and he's really, really scary and hard to deal with. So that's a really good one. Down to Earth really played into a big theme of the box, was to do with the fact that these spider heroes are down to Earth. They're regular people with regular lives. You know, we've been in space for a long time with the last two encounter boxes and dealing with these world-ending threats. And this is back to your street level Marvel Comics. This is Spider-Man being late for school because he had to stop a criminal on the way kind of stuff. And this encounter set really reflects that type of thing. Most everything in it has to be dealt with in alter ego, because you're actually taking care of it as your regular human person, your everyday life. You're not being a superhero. So that's a really cool concept and a really interesting way they brought that out for this particular box, because that's such a big part of Miles's life. And, you know, just the Spider-Man type character has always been that way. Now we come to the Goblin Gear mod that has the Advanced Glider. So what the Advanced Glider does is it attaches to the villain, and then every time they activate against you, well, once per turn, but so when they activate against you, they're going to activate again. So he attacks, then he attacks again, or he schemes and he schemes again. And that is awful. And it's not just a matter of paying resources to get rid of it. You actually have to discard attack cards from your hand that have a combined resource cost of 3 to get rid of it. That's not a guaranteed thing you're going to be able to do anytime soon, depending on the hero you're playing. You might not have good attack cards that add up to 3, and it might be hard to get them into your hand at the same time. So that card that is such a nasty, horrible, awful card. But it's a lot of villain attachments. That's by far the most egregious, but they're all pretty tough. So it's one of those types that beef up the villain. It's a really neat one, but it's very hard. It's going to make any villain harder to play against. Guerrilla Tactics is really fun. These life-size decoys, which is just kind of a hilarious card that makes it so you can't thwart side schemes because they've got a stuffed version of Dr. Octopus distracting you. It's just very, very funny. But that's a fun one. It's got a lot of side schemes in it and just really messes with you in weird ways. Got Osborne Tech, similar to the Goblin Gear, that wants to go on the villain and just makes them stronger. A lot of attachments here. Can do a lot of cool things. Personal Nightmare really plays into the whole Mysterio thing. You have a lot of illusions that are how he triggers his powers, but it could be fun to put these in others. This Fool's Paradise card is a really interesting card in that it gives your identity +2 hand size, which is incredibly tempting to keep it in play, but it gives you an acceleration, a crisis, and a hazard icon, so you really probably should get rid of it, but it's just a really interesting design. The temptation to keep it is strong. Sinister Salt is a way to get the Sinister Six into any deck. It has all 6 of them as giant minions, which is fun. Symbiotic Strength brings venom flavor to any villain you play with some small allies and just a lot of attachments. And this terrifying card, Swinging Assault, there's 2 copies of it. And if you're in Alter Ego, when this card pops out, it makes you change to hero form and then the villain attacks you. So you are never safe if you have this encounter set in your deck. Whispers of Paranoia comes with a lot of annoying attachments that go on you or your allies and mess with you in weird ways. So that one can be fun to include. And then we come to the campaign, and this campaign is really fascinating. Every campaign, they go out of their way to have a different gimmick. You know, in the first one, the Rise of Red Skull, it was all about just getting these tech attachments. And then in the second one, they had the market. And then the Mad Titan Shadow, they just had the side schemes that flipped over. And this one is definitely a much more involved campaign. You have to use the back of the rule book, has a whole list of things, and as you get victory points, and you keep climbing this ladder and getting more special abilities, but you also add more bad things to the campaign. So there's a lot more involved, and there's a lot of cards that go into it. And I'm not going to talk about it too much just because, one, it's complicated. It's not overly complicated, but there's a lot more to it. And two, I haven't really played it that much. But there's a lot going on with it. A lot of it's very cool looking. There's like an extra side scheme that goes in the deck that if you complete that, you get bonuses. There's all kinds of shield upgrades that you can get that make your hero stronger. Sort of a cross between the market cards and the tech from Rise of the Red Skull. Now, another element of the campaign cards that are really cool, we're going to see right here, we have this Venom basic ally and these Symbiote Suit basic upgrades. And the way they work is in the campaign, they have to be earned, but they can also be used outside of the campaign as just regular deck building cards. And this was just another smart innovation, I think, in these design of these campaigns, is normally when you have cards like the market cards in Galaxy's Most Wanted, or say the Shawarma card or the Norn Stones from the Thanos box, you can only use those when you're playing the campaign, and it's kind of unfortunate because they're really neat and it would be fun to just grab them and throw them in a deck, and nobody's going to yell at you if you do. But you know what I mean, like rules as written, you're only supposed to use them during the campaign. And here we have these incredibly powerful cards, and you are allowed to include them in your decks outside of it. They're just regular deck building cards. I think that's so wonderful. So let's take a look at them here. The Venom ally is a 2 thwart, 3 attack, 6 health for 4. Seems incredibly good, but he has a hazard icon, so as long as he's alive, the first player is going to be getting an extra encounter card. But his response is after you reveal an encounter card, you can deal a damage to him and then deal damage to an enemy equal to the number of icons. And it actually does include the special boost ability icon, which is pretty interesting in that card's boost area. So you are getting an extra encounter card, but you can punish the villain by dealing damage back to them for the encounter cards. So he's really, really fun to include. And the Symbiote Suit, I'm a huge fan of this card. It's a 4-cost upgrade, and you can only put 1 in your deck, so you can't really count on it, but it gives you +1 to each of your basic powers, +1 to your hand size, and 10 extra hit points, all at the cost of an extra encounter card per turn, which could be high, but I think it's well rewarded. Those extra hit points really help compensate for the extra damage you might be taking because of those cards. And the +1 to your basic powers, if you have a hero that can ready at least once per turn reliably, I think that's totally worth it. The extra hand size is obviously very nice. So the Symbiote Suit is such a neat card. So many ways to envision the heroes that can make good use of that. The extra encounter card is a little scary, though that's mostly for solo, and multiplayer, I understand, it's pretty fun to just put that on, and then everybody else has to suffer for the fact that you're wearing the black suit, which is kind of funny. You only get your counter card every so often, but that's a really good card. And overall, this box was just incredible. I am actually very excited to play this campaign. The way it works, I wish there was a picture of it here on the screen, but just the whole ladder that you climb, getting experience points and all the special abilities, you get to start with a lot of cool things, but then the villains also get extra things. It's a really neat way to do it, and I'm so pleased that they're doing every campaign differently. We've seen kind of how the next one's going to work, and it's very different. It was just awesome of them to decide from the beginning they were going to make every campaign have a different gimmick, and they're not just going to do the same thing over and over again. They easily could have, and it would have probably been fine. So even though the campaigns aren't as involved as games like Arkham Horror could be, or even Lord of the Rings are probably a little bit more involved than this one, I still am so pleased with how much effort they are putting into making each one feel distinct. And this one is absolutely fascinating, and I look forward to playing it. And overall, this box is just 2 huge thumbs up. A very, very good start to this cycle. And we're just going to let the good times roll with Nova, who is a very, very good hero. Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and spoil it for you right now. I think every hero in this cycle is phenomenal. So we're just going to have fun going through all these awesome heroes and all these awesome cards. So here we have Nova, and his whole thing is he has this really neat helmet that gives him a wild resource when he exhausts it. It's an upgrade that comes into play pretty much at the beginning of the game, and it readies every time Nova exhausts. So it is basically unlimited resources if you can keep readying Nova, but at the very least it's going to be worth at least 2 resources a turn, and he started with it on the table. That's incredibly strong. And his whole thing is he plays events that, even though there's a cost of 2, if you pay for it with a wild resource, which is what the helmet generates, that pays for the whole card. So his cards are very, very cheap. It's easy for him to play a lot of cards on his turn. His signature ally, Ms. Marvel, which is cool to see. She returns your events to your hand to be played again. He has this unbelievably fun card, Unleash Nova Force, that says, until the end of the round, each time Nova defeats an enemy or removes the last threat from a scheme, ready Nova and draw a card. Each time, no limit. So if there's at least 2, 3, 4 targets on the board, you can go absolutely crazy with this, removing side schemes, killing minions, readying, drawing cards, keep going. It is some of the most fun you can have in this game. Now, in solo, sometimes I find it difficult to find enough targets to make this card really worth it. But you're playing 2 or 3 players, you're easily going to have enough stuff on the board to keep you busy. And there's ways to build decks to pull things out as well. So this card is, and I think even if you just have 2 targets, it's still worth playing. It only costs 1. So you don't have to get a lot of value out of this. But if you do have a lot of targets, you can make it just nuts. One of the coolest cards in the entire game comes in his pack, Connection to the World Mind. It's simply a resource card that provides a wild, but it does not count towards your hand size. So if you draw this at the end of the turn, it's basically like it's not even there and you get to draw another card. So it's really is just a free resource to help power everything that he's doing. His alter ego support lets you shuffle those back into your deck. And he is just an absolute joy to play. He just flies. He just feels like he's zipping around, just shooting everything, taking out everything in sight. And he is incredibly fun. Even though he has small stats, I think it's totally compensated by how cheap his cards are and how easy it is to play them multiple times with Ms. Marvel. And just the economy that comes from the helmet makes it so easy to build any kind of deck you want to build. He can afford to do anything you want him to. He is incredibly strong and incredibly fun. I think he plays well in pretty much every aspect thanks to the economy. He doesn't have any particularly good synergy with leadership, I suppose, but you could just afford allies really easily because of the helmet. So everything about him is a lot of fun. Now, he did come in aggression, and there are some really, really good aggression cards in this deck. First of all, we see the Locust. So it is trait locked to the champion trait. I didn't mention it, but Nova is a champion. One thing that was a little odd about this cycle is it was very much split between Web Warriors and champions. So neither of them got a ton of support, but I think they both got enough to be really strong traits. And we see a lot of these allies that require you to be a champion to play them. The Locust is very good, where when it comes into play, it adds an aggression event from your discard pile to your hand. I so wish this wasn't trait locked to the champions, because that's obviously such a hugely useful thing that would go in every single aggression deck forever. So it makes sense that she is, but it's just too bad because it's just so cool to be able to get your aggression events back so easily. You know, you can put that in Ms. Marvel because she's a champion, so that works well for her. And we started to see some better aerial support again this time around, because his helmet gives him aerial, so he has aerial right from the start. So you can put the aerial cards right in his deck and you know they're going to work fine. This one does 4 damage for 1. All you have to do is attack before you play it. Very good. No Quarter is a fascinating card. It deals 4 damage to an enemy, and then for any excess damage that you did, you get to discard cards from the top of your deck, and if any of them are red, they go into your hand. So it gives red an interesting way to draw cards, but at a cost and a risk. So there's ways you can sort of build a whole deck around this card. It's really fun. 1 by 1 deals 2 damage to an enemy, and if it defeats it, deal 2 damage to another. That's pretty good value for 1 in the right scenario. There's a lot of really strong red cards, and we're not done yet. Fluid Motion is an upgrade that comes into play, and after you play an attack event, you can exhaust it to give your hero +1 attack until the end of the phase. So it's like a cheaper combat training, but you know, you have to play an attack event to trigger it. But if you can get multiples into play and play multiple attack events, you can really get a lot of value out of that, especially if you can ready your hero. And then Hone Technique is another one of those cards that really took the game by storm. That says when you play an aggression attack event, if you paid for it using a mental resource, increase the amount of damage that event deals by its printed cost. So just as an example, if you have no Quarter here and you have Hone Technique in play, instead of it doing 4 damage, it would do 6 because you're adding its cost to it. And there are a lot of really big cards you can combo that with. That makes Uppercut a better card. It makes Dive Bomb a monster card. And so that basically became a deck archetype all of its own. Really, really powerful card. And then we see a card that immediately became one of my favorite cards in the entire game, the Moon Girl ally. She costs 3 basic. You have to be a champion or a genius to play her. And there were a lot of older heroes that aren't champions but do have the genius trait, like Iron Man, Wasp, Bruce Banner. It's really, really nice to see that she could play in some of those. And after you play her from your hand, you get to draw a card for each mental resource used to pay for her. It is incredibly easy to pay 3 for her, put her into play, and then immediately draw 3 cards. That is so much fun. It never gets old. And she thwarts for 2, attacks for 2, and then takes a hit for you. It's basically a free ally that just gives you so much value. This Everyday Hero is sort of an interesting resource card that requires you to have the civilian trait to do weird things. And then the Champion's Mobile Bunker is another huge card. Champion's got a lot of support for there only being a few in this cycle. That's a support card that comes into play, and then you can draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards. It's just super, super helpful for anybody's consistency that you're going to be able to find the cards you need quickly. A fantastic card I always put in any deck that I'm building for a champion. And his off aspect cards really leaned on the aerial trait that I was mentioning. Here's a thwart one similar to the pitchback that removes 3 threat after you thwart. Height advantage is not that good, I don't think. While your identity has the aerial trait, you reduce damage that you take from each enemy attack by 1. That'd be great, except for the next line. It says when your turn begins, discard this card. So unless this thing is going to prevent a lot of damage from many attacks, it just doesn't seem worth it. But maybe I'm missing something. And you'll notice usually there's 3 different off aspect cards, but here there's only 2, because another cool thing they did this cycle is at the cost of a few deck building cards, they put an extra modular encounter set in every hero pack. And so here we see the Armadillo, who is an incredibly terrifying boss type minion, and a lot of good cards that support him. And so this was a really neat idea, and another way to get some smaller time minions that we might not know about from the Marvel Universe into the game. So this was a really cool thing as well. Nova, what an awesome pack. And it's only getting better, folks, because as good as Nova is, Ironheart, in my opinion, is even better and more fun. I love everything about what Ironheart is doing. This hero is so fascinating and such a blast to play. She has 3 forms. So we see 3 alter egos, and then they'll translate into 3 hero forms. And her whole thing is collecting these progress counters and then using those to level up her suit. And it's such a blast to collect these counters. Her events, attack and thwart events, give her counters. She has an alter ego ability that gives her a counter. She has a lot of different ways to get these progress counters, and then when she levels up, her suit just gets stronger and stronger. She starts out with only 4 hand size and a 1, 2, 3 stat line, and she ends up with a 6 hand size in hero form and a 3, 2, 3 stat line. And her ability after that is you can use your progress counters to do 2 damage. And there's no limit to that. You just keep chucking progress counters for 2 damage. So if you can get her to level 3, which is surprisingly easy to do, most of the time you just take over the game with those extra damage that you can do with those counters. A fascinating signature ally that when Brawn is exhausted, he becomes a resource generator. That's very strange, but very cool. And there's ways to make good use of that. It's got a lot of really fun cards. Stroke of Genius is a resource card that after you spend it, you get to place a progress counter and then draw a card. So it's just free and super useful. And you're just constantly trying to cycle through a deck as fast as you can. Tony Stark's AI lets you look at 2 cards and add 1 to your hand, is very, very strong to help refine her cards. She's definitely one of those heroes that focuses very much on her own specific cards because you want to get those progress counters as fast as you can. And of course, the only way to get those is by playing her cards. She has an alter ego support that gives her progress counters, and she has these 2 upgrades that are just insanely powerful. For 2 cost, you can get your photon blasters and your propulsion jets. They give you extra hit points, and then you can exhaust them to deal damage or remove threat equal to what version number she's in. So they're really not that good until you get to at least version 2. But when you're at version 3, this thing is exhausting for 3 threat, and this one's exhausting for 3 damage every turn. It's got completely independent from your hero. It's just nuts. This hero is so unbelievably powerful and fun to play. Now, I guess there could be a weakness where if she gets off to a slow start, and I've had a few games where you get off to a slower start and you can't quite get those progress counters fast enough, the smaller hand size will hamper you and sort of keep you down, but that I've never quite run into that. That's almost just more theoretical. Every time I've played her, I think I've always gotten her to 3rd form, and I think I've always done it relatively quickly. She's just so fast, and her 3 defense helps you keep her alive while you're trying to get that going. She's got just a ton of good cards, and she's got the economy to do whatever you want. Those Stroke of Geniuses really, really help, and we're going to see some cards in here, or at least one particular card I can think of that's going to help her pay for stuff too, which is really, really nice. So she came with leadership, and this one, we've been seeing a lot of these sort of archetype in one hero type decks, and this one is all about this go all out card. It says exhaust your hero, deal damage to an enemy equal to the total of all your stats. So if you get her to level 3, for example, she's a 3/2/3, so this card would do 8 damage. Now it does require you to exhaust your hero, so you're not really doing 8 extra damage, you're doing, however much extra damage minus your attack stat that you would have used anyway, but it's still pretty neat and encourages you to try to build your stats up as high as you can to do a huge attack, which is fun. We have a lot of these champion allies that have various effects. None of them are all that great, so I'm not going to read them, but they're interesting. Push Ahead does the same thing as Go All Out, but for thwarting. So I guess if you really need to remove a huge chunk of threat, this will do it, but it's pretty expensive. And then we just have a lot of cards in this deck that are going to boost your stats to try to get that Go All Out thing. Reprint a morale boost. This R&D facility is a support that'll stay in play, that'll increase your attack and thwart. So that can help contribute to that Go All Out. Or if you're just a multi-readying hero like Quicksilver or Captain America can really make use of this, where they're going to get to use those stats multiple times in a turn. And so her leadership cards didn't really play to my particular style of play. I think they're just okay. Her basic cards here, it's interesting that they already reprinted Agent 13. I'm not sure why they gave us a second one of her. But Snowguard is a really cool ally that, depending on what you choose when you play her, you can get some very different effects. Vivian's a really cool ally. She only costs 2, so that's always nice and basic. And she makes a card as if it were blank for a turn, so that can lead to all kinds of fun interactions. And then we see some more champion support with probably the most broken card in the entire game. I'm not even joking. This Go for Champions card costs a 3 event. You can only have one in your deck. You have to be a champion to play it. But it says that each champion card in play cannot take damage until the end of the round. That's what, like, none of your allies take consequential damage. You don't take damage from the villain. None of the other players at the table, if they're playing champions, take damage from the villain. And that's till the end of the round. So even if the villain gets multiple attacks, you're just not going to take any damage. And you can only have one in your deck, but if everybody's playing champions, everybody can have one in their deck. So there can be a Go for Champions active on almost every round of the game. I don't even know what they were thinking. It's fun though. I'm not above using it, but I will admit it's probably way too strong. And then we have this very, very nice, very useful, simple card, Ingenuity, 2-cost upgrade. You can only play it if you're a genius, which she is, and some of the ones I mentioned earlier. But you can just simply exhaust it to get a mental resource. So it's just really nice to be able to add an extra resource upgrade to a lot of different heroes' decks. And then her off aspect cards, through simply just got some more champion allies, Bombshell, Wasp, and Pinpoint. Bombshell and Wasp are just okay. But Pinpoint, I want to talk about for a second, is really, really fascinating. You have to be a champion to play her, and her stats aren't that great. But when a player card would be placed in the discard pile, you can exhaust her and shuffle that card and back into its owner's deck. So I like to just have her out there. And every time anything useful, whether it's a really good ally or one of those upgrades that you have to spend, leaves play, you can exhaust her to put it back into your deck, because you get a lot of consistency from that. Especially, I think, in protection, there are a lot of interesting cards that you can use to shuffle back into your deck. So I think that's a fantastic ally that I pretty much always use when playing a protection champion. And this one also came with an extra modular, the Zax mod. This one can be pretty challenging, especially if you're playing a hero like Captain Marvel or Iron Man, who likes to use a lot of energy resources. This one punishes you for energy resources. But even if you don't, there are 2 cards that will come into play and make it so that everything you have is energy resources, so you can still be hurt by it. So pretty cool, and I've used it once or twice. I quite like it, and again, I just love that they're including these. But yeah, this pack is unbelievably awesome. Ironheart is one of my absolute favorite heroes. Next time I do my rankings, she's going to be at least in the top 5. She's going to be way up there. She's really fun. And then we come to Spider-Ham, which I don't think anybody saw coming, and especially when they announced that he was coming on April Fool's Day, but it was real, and here he is. If it weren't for the Into the Spider-Verse movie, I suspect a lot of people wouldn't even know that this character existed. But yes, there is a cartoon pig version of Spider-Man, and yes, he is in this game, and yes, he is awesome. He is top shelf, super powerful, way up there. He's pretty straightforward, but he is incredibly strong. His ability is that every time he takes any amount of damage, he gets to put a tune counter on him, and then those tune counters can be spent as wild resources. So it is not difficult at all for him to collect a lot of these tune counters and just use them as resources and just play every card in his hand every turn. It's incredibly powerful. His cards are so strong. Now, the thing that sets him apart is that you have to do these silly gestures when you play him, because he's a cartoon and it's meant to be funny. So like his signature ally here, after Captain America enters play, give someone a high five and then do all the cool things the card does. Another one has you sticking your tongue out, reading text out loudly, things like that. So the rules insert did specify that all of these gesture effects are optional, but they are also fun. So feel free to go ahead and wiggle your body when you use cartoon physics and try not to take any damage. It's just a lot of fun. So his cards are just all over the place with how good they are. You have this Ham It Up at 0 cost, and it removes threat equal to how many tune counters you have. So it's unlimited how much threat this card can remove. His I Don't Think So cancels an encounter card is very nice. He has 2 copies of his Petulant Pig that you stick your tongue out at the villain, and then the villain attacks you and you draw 3 cards. And since he wants to take damage, you don't mind that you're being attacked, and you get to draw 3 cards in the process. But the thing that really puts him over the top, I think, is insanely strong. I cannot believe he has 3 copies of this Swinging Web Pig. It says 3 cost, hero action, deal 6 damage to an enemy and confuse that enemy. That's crazy they gave him 3 copies of a card that can confuse the enemy and deal 6 damage. Being able to flip down that often is incredibly useful. Now, he doesn't have a crazy strong alter ego, though he does have a pretty high recovery of 5, and since he's going to be taking a lot of damage to get those tune counters, it's worth it just to flip down, even if all you do is recover. And you do get a tune counter for recovering. So you're going to be able to do that often. I wish more heroes had that easy access to confuse, because there's a lot of heroes that want to go to alter ego and just can't seem to find their way there without losing the game. And that's why it just blows me away that they put 3 copies of this in his deck. You never see that much confuse in a hero kit. He has a decent alter ego support, gives him an extra tune counter. This cartoon physics card is nuts. It's 1 cost upgrade that just stays in play, and when you would take any amount of damage, you can just discard it. Now, you do have to will your body, but then you prevent all but 1 of that damage. And it's really clever that it still lets you take 1 damage because you want to get that tune counter. And then he has some really good upgrades that increases attack and thwart and ready him and give him overkill and stuff. He's just, everything he does is very strong, and he's incredibly fun to play. It's just fun to play your cards, right? It's fun to have basically unlimited resources to do whatever you want. So no matter how you build your deck, you're going to be able to do what you want to do. Now, the deck he came with is very, very weird in that he came with a Justice deck with 15 reprints, 15 cards that we already had in our collection if you buy everything. So that was a pretty disappointing, actually. Opening this pack, I was excited to see a lot of cool new Justice cards, and there aren't very many cool new Justice cards because it was a lot of cards we already had. And then the Justice cards that are here, most of them really aren't all that great. Lady Spider's is an okay ally. This version of Spider-Man is pretty neat. And by the way, there are so many versions of cards that just say Spider-Man in the title now that if you look at Marvel CDB to build decks and you see like 8 Spider-Mans in a deck, good luck figuring out which one is which. I really wish they had something that differentiated them in their titles, but they're all just called Spider-Man. Even the odds isn't that great. A bunch of reprints here, cards we've already talked about, so many. Now this Overwatch is really good. You attach it to a scheme, and then when any amount of threat is removed from the attached scheme, you discard it and remove an equal amount of that from a different scheme. So it basically doubles your thwart. And so that can be really powerful. And all this stuff works really well. Like, I'm complaining that they're all reprints, but it's basically a one way or another deck where all of these cards were reprinted because they work so well with one way or another. And so his deck works very well. A one way or another deck is strong, but if you buy all the cards, it was kind of unfortunate to get so many cards that we already had. But Overwatch was a new one for that archetype, and it plays very well into it. And then there are some really cool new Web Warrior allies. Now, one thing I didn't talk about yet is that most of the Web Warrior allies are neutral or basic, and I really like that because you can always include that in any Web Warrior deck you play, regardless of the aspect you choose. Now, the downside of that is a lot of Web Warrior decks do tend to look the same because all these cards are so strong, it's kind of hard not to include them. And since you can in any deck, you're going to. So there's maybe not as much variety in Web Warrior decks as there are in others, but I still think these cards are so fun to use. I don't really care that much, but that's a minor criticism, I suppose. So we have Scarlet Spider here that when you reveal an encounter card, you can try to guess what it is, and if you're right, you get to draw a card. It's pretty neat. And this SP//DR or Spider or SPDR, who knows how to say that, ally here, 2 cost, 2 health, have to be Web Warrior to play it like most of them. And you get to add her to your hand if she was defeated by taking excess consequential damage. So she has 2 health. So you attack with her for one turn, take 1 consequential damage. And then on the next turn, you thwart with her for 2, take 2 consequential damage. Then she bounces back to your hand. And then you just play her and you do it again. So you have this sort of interesting, fun little cycle with it. And I like the concept. It's a robot, so it kind of does the same thing over and over. I don't know if that's what the theme is or not, but I do like the concept. And then if you have the Web of Life and Destiny in play from one of the earlier packs, you get to draw a card when this card leaves play. So it comes to your hand and you draw a card, really helping to defray that 2 cost to just play it over and over again. This card is going to lead to some really stupid things happening in this game, I think, at some point, if it isn't already. We got 3 more copies of Team Building Exercise with more reprints, but it works so well with Spider-Ham because he has the cartoon trait, and like every single one of his cards is cartoon traded, so this is of course is going to work with him, so I'm not surprised they gave him to us. And then you get another Web of Life and Destiny, so if you didn't have one to go with SPDR before, you do now. and that just works really well. Yeah, his is one of the best precons, I think, because it's one way or another deck anyway, and it has strong web warrior support. This is a really, really good pack. Even if you don't like the cartoony nature, you don't want to do the silly gestures, I think it's totally fine. Ignore all that stuff. It's a fun hero to play. And even though you get a ton of reprints, you do get some good cards, especially for the web warriors, and a little bit of justice support. Now, he does come with another very strange card called Warrior of the Great Web. It's a 1-cost upgrade. You have to attach it to a character with Spider in its title, and then they gives them the Web Warrior trait. So right now, the only 2 people in the game that aren't Web Warriors that have that title are Spider-Man and Spider-Woman, which is why this card exists. People wanted to see a way to bring those old Spider heroes into this Web Warrior stuff. And it does give an attack bonus after Web Warrior allies leave play. So it's still worth using, even if you're not trying to turn Spider-Man or Spider-Woman into a Web Warrior. You can just use it to pump the attack of whatever character you do put this on. But it's an upgrade you have to rely on if you are hoping to turn those older heroes into Web Warrior. So I don't know that it works very reliably in that way. But it's neat that they did something. It's fine. And then the modular encounter set they came with, where this one was the Inheritors, and they really, really seem to hate Web Warriors. And when they come into play, they have a worse effect if there's a Web Warrior in play. So if you're playing a Web Warrior hero and you're in your hero form, they're going to do something really nasty when they come out. A lot of really beefy minions. I haven't played with this one yet, but I'm excited to. This one looks really, really cool. So a really good pack. Like I said, even if you don't like the nature of the character, I know it's a little weird and people were put off by it. He's such a fun hero. He's really strong, and you get some cool cards if you like the Web Warriors. And the final pack that has come out, and what brings us current to where we are in the state of the game, is SPDR herself. And you'd think I was getting tired of saying it by now, but my goodness, what a good hero. They are firing on all cylinders. This is, in my opinion, the best cycle in the game. And that's really nice to see because it's also the newest cycle, which means they're just getting better and better. These heroes are all incredible. They all feel really strong, maybe too strong. Are we seeing some power creep in the game? Yeah, probably. Do I care? No, not at all. I'm having fun playing it. I don't really care. There's ways to make the game harder if you want to, so it doesn't really matter to me if the heroes are getting stronger. I don't think it's a problem. Now, this one is another one of the weird ones that you kind of really have to pay attention to what you're doing. It's easy to play this hero wrong because she actually has 2 different identity cards that you have to use. She has her Penny Parker form that flips over to this SPDR upgrade, and then we have an SPDR suit that flips over to the SPDR suit hero. And so it's really tricky. They flip together, so when you flip one, you flip the other. It's basically Penny getting in the giant robot suit. But the thing that makes her really weird and tricky is she only has a 4 hand size in Alter Ego and a 3 hand size in her hero form, and that sounds like just the most awful thing ever. But the special ability on the hero is that they can exhaust their interfaced upgrades they control, and they have a lot of interface upgrades, and that generates a resource. So you can either exhaust the upgrade for its special ability, or you can simply exhaust it for a resource. So even though you don't have very many cards in your hand, you're going to be using your resources that come from the upgrades in play to play them. So at least you don't have to discard the cards in your hand to play the cards once you get a few of these upgrades out. And it is surprisingly easy, even with the 3 and 4 hand size, to get these upgrades into play. Now, they all mostly cost 2 or 3, and there is one that costs 1, which is nice. But, you're only drawing a few cards a turn, so how are you supposed to find these things? Well, there's a couple ways. There are 3 copies of this All Systems Go card that says to either ready each interface upgrade you control, or you can search your deck and discard pile for 1 and add it to your hand. So if you don't draw one of your upgrades, there's a good chance you're at least going to draw one of these to go then find the upgrade. And then later in the game, when you do have some in play, you can use this first part, ready each interface upgrade you control. This can lead to some massive, massive turns where after you've exhausted all 4 or 5 of your upgrades for resources or the special abilities, you can ready them all up and do it again. It's crazy powerful. And the other way that you can find them is with this Aunt May and Uncle Ben support. It says to exhaust it, discard the top 2 cards if you're in hero form, or 3 if you're an alter ego of your deck, and you get to add each of her hero signature cards into your hand. So clearly this hero is just trying to find their own cards as fast as they can. And this is going to help you do that. So it's all about getting these upgrades out as quickly as you can, and then just ready. Because this character can ready so many times. You have the host spider here that you can exhaust to ready your suit. Remember that we can use All Systems Go to ready all of the upgrades, and this is one of the interface upgrades. There's also this SPDR command support that would allow you to ready an upgrade again by discarding a card from your hand, so you can use that to ready the host spider. So there's any number of ways to ready this hero. And so you can really get a lot of use out of the 222 stat line. It's very solid. And if you use cards to increase it, you're just going to get a lot of value out of that. The signature ally is crazy. For 4 cost, it only has a 1/1 stat line with 3 health, but it gets +1/+1 for every resource that you used to pay for it from exhausting your interfaces. So you can easily exhaust 4 or 5 of your interfaces to make this thing absolutely huge. And so that's incredibly strong. And I didn't even talk about what the interfaces do besides generating resources, is they can all be exhausted to increase your stats. There's one to give +2 to attack, one +2 to thwart, one +2 defense, as you would expect, and also one to ready. So she's just kind of one of those heroes that can kind of do it all. Her events are really interesting. The attack event deals 5 damage, and then if you used one of the upgrades to help pay for it, it also stuns. And then the thwart event is really good. For 2, it removes 3, and if you use one of the upgrades again, it removes 3 more from a scheme, so you can spread that out. It's very, very helpful. And it's just crazy what this hero can do. It does definitely one of those that requires you to build up, similar to an Iron Man or even Ironheart, where you just kind of need to get a few turns to get set up. But if you do, this hero can take over a game. The turns are crazy powerful, but the thing that makes her so fun is you have so many choices. You have all these upgrades in play, and they either do what they do, or they can be exhausted for a resource, and they can be readied so easily with the All Systems Go cards. So you're just constantly trying to math out exactly what you want to do. And it does feel like piloting a robot. I know that sounds crazy, but you have so many cards in play that you're just turning and readying and deciding what to do with. And it feels like you're like trying to code a computer program or something. I don't mean to make it sound hard. It's not hard. It's fun. It's fascinating that you just have so many options of how you can play your turn out. And I'm almost glad that she doesn't have very many cards in your hand, because you already have enough to pay attention to with everything that's on the table. If you had 5 or 6 cards in your hand, it'd be even harder to choose what order you want to do everything in. So yeah, just an incredibly awesome. This is the newest hero, the latest one we've played. Well, technically the last few have come out 2 at a time. So she and Spider-Hand came out at the same time, but it's the last one that they have organized here, so we'll call it that way. And it just is leaving the game that's where it's currently at on such a high note. Now, let's look at the protection cards that she came with. Are really, really some good ones here. This 2-cost Daredevil ally, it's interesting. It doesn't have a subtitle here because I guess in their universe, they don't actually know who this is. So we don't know that that's a Matt Murdock Daredevil or somebody else, but that's a pretty good card. Spider-Man Noir is kind of weird. Thwip is a really good card for Web Warriors. You deal damage to a character you control, and then you get to put out 2 stun status cards. It's very, very good. Just such easy access to stun is incredible. I have another one of those really good basic Web Warrior allies. This one's Otto Octavius, so Dr. Octopus, when he was Spider-Man, or Superior Spider-Man as he liked to think of himself. He only costs 2 when he comes into play. He readies an upgrade, and if the upgrade has the tech trait, you get to draw a card. So he is very useful. You're always going to want to use him in heroes that have a lot of tech, like SPDR, but I think pretty much all of them have something. The Force Field Generator is an interesting way to prevent a lot of damage. Repurpose is an interesting way to discard a tech upgrade to ready your hero and get a bunch of extra stats, but that card has very specialized uses. I'm sure there's going to be some really cool combo decks with it, but you're not going to throw that in every deck. And then we saw some interesting support for heroes that have at least 14 printed hit points. I never occurred to me that they might make cards based on that particular statistic, but so this works with characters like Hulk and Thor, and this character's SPDR, Drax, I think She-Hulk, and I don't know, maybe I'm forgetting someone, but this one gives your identity steady, and that is super, super helpful. For one, Hulk hates being stunned, Thor hates being stunned, Drax hates being stunned. So that is a really, really nice card to have in the card pool. And then there was another one called Limitless Stamina, 1-cost event that you have to have 14 printed hit points, and it simply readies your hero. Just very simple, but incredibly useful. Very nice again for Drax, Thor, Hulk. These heroes love to ready and attack again. So that's just a great card. A really neat way to support those beefy heroes that have some limitations. You know, all those big hit point heroes all have low hand sizes. And so they definitely needed some help, and it's a cool way to give them some support. She also had a really interesting leadership card she came with for her off aspect cards. This Clarity of Purpose, that's a 1-cost upgrade, and you attach to a character and you just exhaust it to deal the damage and get a resource. This card is nuts on Spider-Ham because he wants to take damage anyway, so this card is basically 2 resources for Spider-Ham. Speaking of Spider-Ham, we got kind of a lame Spider-Ham ally. He's just okay. And then we get the final modular encounter set of this cycle, the Iron Spiders Sinister Six. So I guess this must be the Sinister Six from her universe. And I have played these guys, and they are pretty tough. These are some really nasty minions with some pretty good support. That's a really good one to play. So there you have it. Yet another, we're 4 for 4 of amazing heroes in this cycle. 6 for 6 if you want to count the heroes in the Sinister Motives box. And that brings us to current in the game. That is the state of the game. That's everything we've seen so far in almost 3 years of Marvel Champions. 35 heroes, something like 28 villains, 50 some modular encounter sets. So the state of the game is that it is in an amazing place. If the game ended today, and I'm so glad it's not, but if the game ended today, it would still be amazing. We would have so many things to play. We would still never get tired of it. That many heroes, that many villains, that many mod sets. You can play through the campaigns. It's incredible what they have accomplished with this game, how much content they've produced in that amount of time, and how much quality content. And we talked about some of the heroes that aren't that great. Valkyrie, Hulk, Doctor Strange was out of balance. Maybe the Galaxy's Most Wanted box wasn't the best product ever, but that is such a minor hiccup in the insane amount of fun, quality gameplay that you get with this game. And it's not stopping. There is more to come. I'm going to do one more bonus episode where we talk about the future of the game, but that leaves us at where we are right now. That brings us current to the state of the game. I want to thank you so much for joining me for this. This was a lot of fun to go back and look at everything. It just made me love the game even more. I hope this was helpful to you, either in reminiscing over the game that you've enjoyed, or maybe you're looking to get into the game and now you know everything that's available for it up to this point. And so thanks for hanging out with me. If you enjoyed this, feel free to give a like to these videos, subscribe. I don't say that kind of stuff very often. I save it for the end. And I just really want to thank you if you watched all these and you made it all the way to the end. I appreciate you hanging out with me. This was a joy to do. So I hope you'll come back for the bonus episode. I'm going to talk about the X-Men stuff and speculate about what might come after, just for fun. But either way, I hope you'll join me next time we get up in game. Thanks so much, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.